There's been a lot of talk lately in the political discussion online about dating preferences. There's been outrage from the skeptic community about what they perceive people shaming them for their sexual preferences, calling them bigots. And then within segments of the social justice community and LGBT educator community, there have been calls for analysis, self-reflection, and real evaluation of norms, where norms come from. Can we transcend these things that we're socialized to believe about ourselves and others? And how do these norms affect the lives and safety of other people? How does a man who identifies in a binary sense as cisgender, heterosexual, who finds himself sexually attracted to a trans woman and finds out at some point in dating her, whether it's through verbal disclosure or physical discovery, that he's dating a trans woman rather than the standard cis-het woman that he's used to dating. Standard. But again, those are socialized norms. Those are, socialized norms are basically arbitrary qualifiers, and they don't read across all cultures. If you go into different cultures, the norms about what is straight or gay or trans or how many genders are mainstream, all that stuff fluctuates. So, this self-identifying straight man finds out that he's been dating or sleeping with a trans woman, and he freaks out because he's been taught that trans women are not women. He's been taught that anyone with a dick is a man. And he decides that him being attracted to this person with a penis has catastrophic implications for his identity as a masculine cis male, as an alpha, as the opinions of the other men that he measures himself against, that somehow he's transgressed and crossed over into a position of weakness or supplication because he has expressed desire for a person who possesses a penis. And he freaks out, and part of his panic is that he strangles this trans woman to death, because he's going to punish her for tricking him and transforming who he is during the dupe. They're gay panic is real. And whether it's a straight identifying man reacting to a catcall from a gay man with violence or murder, which has been commonplace for many decades, particularly in big cities. What's the cost What's the cost of this identity of being straight? What's the cost of this identity of the binary? And it's so strange, we're still having these conversations like if most of the science about human sexuality in the 20th century does not support the idea that sexuality is fixed. We're about to hit the 60-year mark next year for when they started releasing when the sex researcher Alfred Kinsey started to release the Kinsey reports, which were the studies he did sampling people, and where he discovered he created something called the Kinsey Scale. Kinsey Scale is a numbered scale. And he basically discovered that, gay and straight exist on these poles. And within these poles is all this gradiency, this spectrum, this fluidity. And there are people who are mostly straight, mostly gay. There are people that are always straight and always gay. There are people who, experience different levels of attraction at different times in their lives. So they may have been, the late life lesbians, for example, may have genuinely, in their youth, preferred the sexual companionship of a cis-het man. And then when they get further along in life, they start to realize that their taste or preferences have changed. Over time, this fluidity occurred. And this sometimes happens with men as well. And I mean, this applies to gender too. There are a lot of people who don't come to a full acceptance of their gender, until into their middle age. Maybe there's like a subtle sort of nagging suspicion, but they, for whatever reason, don't come to terms with who they are, or don't recognize what exactly is out of place until midlife. Myself being a man entering into midlife, I'm about 36 years old, so I'm on the edge of 40. And I will tell you that as you move from, the quarter life into the midlife, you do a lot of introspection. And you start to question about what you've done with the time that you have. And you start to question, how fixed is my identity? Who am I going to be before I leave this earth? And that sometimes means that you start to reevaluate the parameters of your gender. And sometimes you start to reevaluate the parameters of your sexual preferences or your sexual hang-ups. Maybe you expand your horizons and start to experiment some. I'm very glad that the rise of awareness about non-binary genders has led to an environment where maybe some men who hadn't thought about before maybe experimenting with their appearance and not being completely masculine, particularly with the pressure that's put on men to be tethered to this very weighted form of masculinity. Maybe they'll experiment with a skirt or some nail polish or some eyeshadow, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to jump into being like a 10 on the flip from one gender to another. Maybe they just feel like wearing women's pants with a blazer that day, a skirt with a blazer that day. It doesn't transform who they are. It's just a component of how they feel. It's very strange because we don't do this kind of stuff with anything else that we encounter in life in terms of preference. You don't see someone, for example, say, I prefer I prefer bacon cheeseburgers. And I'm just going to eat bacon cheeseburgers every day of my life. And I was born with a preference and a taste for bacon cheeseburgers. There's no social stigma or prohibition against switching over into eating a chili dog instead of a bacon cheeseburger, because you were just in the mood for that today. It doesn't mean anything. It just meant you were hungry. maybe, and again, myself being someone who identifies as pansexual and queer, and I've had partners who are male. I do have a preference for male partners, but I've had female partners that I've loved and had, rich romantic relationships with, and I've had romantic relationships with trans people, trans men, and trans women over the course of my life. And I'm not saying that it should be compulsory and that you're a bigot if you haven't done these things. But I do think that there is some value in the conversation about tolerance, because in society, tolerance is very important, in terms of the daily functioning of a society. The maximum number of people need to be able to go about their day, and tolerance is the first step in that direction, peace and order and all that. So I just think that people should give weight to the science. I think people should acknowledge these 60 years of data that indicate that maybe the dick is not a deal breaker. Maybe black skin is not a deal breaker. Maybe you just think that you only like bacon cheeseburgers. Maybe you'd like a hot dog today.